Scott was looking for small titles to sprinkle money onto and to get a merch license from. My advice for future Fanverse creators is to get as sellable a concept and characters as possible and try not to overdo it on the game itself. That's not what Scott appears to be interested in. He wants something decent obviously, but not ambitious, just quality. The rejection of Aftonbuilt and my experience working with Scott did sour our relationship fan-wise. You know, a never meet your heroes type of deal. FNAF Fangame devs will be FNAF Fangame devs. A couple of days ago, Aftonbuilt, a really impressive proof of concept for a dark first-person Five Nights at Freddy's game, showed up on GameJolt. Produced by Final Night's developer Jelatine and built in Unreal 4, the game claimed to be a rejected Fanverse project that they had been working on for the last 2 years. Set after the events of FNAF 3, you play as the mechanic, one of the engineers responsible for the upkeep of the Fazbear Frights attraction. After saving Springtrap from the fire at the end of FNAF 3, you discover that it is possessed by the spirit of Freddy Fazbear founder William Afton. The mechanic teams up with Afton to build him a new body. The gameplay placed the player into mid-sized arena-style maps, pitting them against animatronic foes that one must trap and dismantle amidst other objectives hidden throughout the level. Most interesting was the dynamic AI concept. The idea was that enemies, maps, and maybe even some objectives could be mixed and matched in a super custom night mode. This could allow you to replay a Freddy level with Foxy as the antagonist, for example. The game is really impressive on a technical level, especially considering the small team size. Sure, there was some jank to it, the controls are pretty unintuitive, and a lot of systems clearly required refinement.
It's moving! Put the light down, please! Put the light down,
Still, considering this was a private demo made only for Scott and not intended for public release, it was very, very impressive. A lot of us were really curious as to why such a promising Fanverse candidate was rejected. Wanting to learn more, I spoke with Liam, project lead at Jelatine and developer of Aftonbuilt as well as the Final Night series, in hopes of getting some more insight on the game as well as the Fanverse as a whole. I was curious about the cancellation, but I was more curious to learn as much as I could about the inner workings of the Fanverse. What does a prospective Fanverse dev go through? How does one get their game in front of Scott for consideration in the Fanverse? For most of us, the Aftonbuilt demo came out of nowhere. I asked Liam, the project lead, how the game was initially conceived. They explained that initially, before the Fanverse had even been announced, Scott had reached out and asked for the source code to the Final Nights games. Scott made no mention of remakes or the Fanverse or anything. Unfortunately, Liam would miss an email as it ended up being sent to a secondary inbox of theirs. Guys, you gotta check your emails. In September, when the Fanverse was announced, Liam double-checked and lo and behold, there it was, a letter of interest from Scott. At first, Liam proposed remaking the Final Night series, but Scott declined this idea. Instead, he gave Liam the option to present a new, original title instead. Thus, Aftonbuilt was born. They worked on a prototype, some footage of which you can see here, in the hopes of selling the idea to Scott on a gameplay basis. Scott was not impressed and asked to see more originality, especially unique character designs. It was clear that the Fanverse was pretty much a merch machine. On top of having a good game, unique characters were the key to getting in. Liam reworked their team and onboarded new creative talent. They developed more unique concepts, like the Foxy design we see in the demo. They continued sending periodic updates to Scott, hoping that eventually he'd allow them into the Fanverse. In the summer, Scott reached out to the team and asked for their information so as to draft a non-disclosure agreement. Remember what else happened in the summer of 2021? Yeah. Unfortunately for Jelatine, in the wake of this controversy, they didn't hear from Scott for another several months. In the fall, they were told that ClickTeam, the people behind the game engine used to make the original FNAF series, as well as the publishers of the first few games, would be in charge of Fanverse communications going forward. According to Liam, they handled things a lot better than Scott did. They were communicative, approachable, and quick to respond. They even got into it with them, which surely made the exchange of information a lot easier. However, they still hadn't signed any paperwork. They continued to work on the game on their own dime for several more months. Finally, nearly a year after Scott asked for their information to draw up an NDA, they finally got the contracts. To be clear, these were just the NDAs, contracts that say we promise not to discuss anything about our negotiations. These contracts didn't grant Jelatine entry into the Fanverse, they were just a prerequisite to even talk about it. It took a year just to get the contracts that allowed them to even enter negotiations. What a mess. Jelatine sent in a pitch video detailing the game, the team's previous accomplishments, and a rough budget estimate. Scott asked them to keep him updated on progress, but did not acknowledge their budget. Months pass. Around October 21st of that year, they finally get into talks about the budget. The Jelatine team has been working really hard on this for a while, and they can't continue to devote time to it without support. People gotta eat and pay rent, and this project was certainly too ambitious for a handful of people to tackle during the evenings and weekends. The negotiations didn't go very smoothly. While ClickTeam was managing the day-to-day stuff for the Fanverse, they couldn't negotiate for Scott. Scott still owns FNAF, and only he can make those final decisions. This gives us some insight into the reality that Scott is still deeply involved in the FNAF franchise, and he hasn't retired at all, really. Unfortunately, Scott's communication failures continued. According to Liam, Scott would occasionally take up to 3 weeks to reply to emails, and all the Jelatine team could do was wait. During this back and forth, the teams discussed multiple budgetary structures and even crowdfunding, but all of these were declined. Naturally, this frustrated the Jelatine team. One member even quit the project entirely, unable to continue to devote time to it without any compensation. Regardless, the team persisted. New hires were brought on and work continued. Finally, after several more showcases, in January of this year, Scott finally agreed to a development timeline, budget, and funding structure for the project. Speaking of January, did you know I had 15 subscribers in January? That was nearly 3 months ago when I started making videos. Thank you guys so much for subscribing. We're nearly at 70,000, and that's just completely insane. For my younger viewers, a funding structure is essentially the schedule on which you get the money. Usually you get some of the money initially to start the project, then you get more money as you hit milestones that you agreed upon ahead of time with your publisher, and so on. This reduces risk for the publisher as they get to check in on the project and exert more control throughout the development. Invigorated by the promise of finally receiving funding and being officially accepted into the Fanverse, the Jelatine team went into hyperdrive, pushing themselves to get a new demo over to Scott in February. They finish it and send it off. As is apparently typical for Scott, several weeks go by with no response. The Jelatine team are becoming incredibly frustrated. They were anticipating this funding weeks ago, and the promising news had only upped the emotional stakes for everyone involved. After 2 long years of thankless, painstaking development, all done in secrecy, without anyone to share and show off their work to, they were finally at the home stretch. Liam reached out and communicated these concerns. Finally, after a few more weeks, they received news through ClickTeam that they should be expecting their contracts within the next week. The team was overjoyed. However, when they opened Scott's email, they found that he had changed his mind on the funding structure yet again. According to Liam, apparently we had not proven ourselves even after that demo. This new contract didn't even admit them into the Fanverse. It just released a bit of money to them so that they could continue working on the project and attempting to prove themselves to Scott. There was still a very real chance that after working on the game for several more months, it would ultimately be rejected and no additional funding would come in. In the short term, this also meant the team would receive substantially less money than they initially agreed to. Jelatine pushed back, voicing their concerns regarding this change. They didn't feel it was right to negotiate a deal with someone only to then change the terms on them when they go to send the contract. However, Scott is within his rights to do that, lame as it sounds. After the team expressed their concerns regarding Scott's sudden change of heart, they immediately got a call from Scott, who offered to fly the entire team out to the south of France to meet with him for a 4-month retreat where they could hash out the negotiations in person in real time. Just kidding, Scott didn't reply for 2 weeks. When he finally did, he handed them a contract denying them entry to the Fanverse, granting them rights to continue working on Aftonbuilt, but only in a non-profit fashion. Even crowdfunding wasn't on the table if they signed it. This contract obviously must have given them a little bit of money, because obviously I don't really understand why they would have signed it, but I doubt it was anywhere close to compensatory for the actual development costs. The negotiations seemed to fall apart when it came to the funding structure, so it's not like Scott would just hand Jelatine a ton of money in a thanks for trying kind of way. This is all just speculation on my part though. Nah, my guess is he handed them just enough money that they couldn't turn it down, but not enough to seriously proceed with the project. That way they would basically have to sign it. I asked Liam that, if in hindsight, they wished they just signed off on Scott's last-minute switcheroo proposal. I do not regret it, no. It would not have moved us any closer to getting into the Fanverse, and the money wasn't enough to continue from where we were. Plus, it made me have my doubts about working with someone who went back on his word so easily. I asked Liam what they would do differently if they were starting a prospective Fanverse project today with all the knowledge they've gained from working on Aftonbuilt. I'd work with actual publishers who are looking for actual games and are willing to invest. Scott was looking for small titles to sprinkle money onto and get a merch license from. I also wouldn't spend 2 years working for free anymore just to prove a concept. Paperwork and sketches and rough prototypes is as far as I'll go. What advice would you give to any future prospective Fanverse creators? My advice for future Fanverse creators is to get as sellable a concept and characters as possible and try not to overdo it on the game itself. That's not what Scott seems to be interested in. He wants something decent obviously, but not ambitious. Ooh, well that one was a doozy. Obviously Liam and the Jelatine team are upset that they worked so hard on this really ambitious, impressive project only for it to collapse right at the cusp of everything coming together. Still, I think there's a lot that can be learned from Liam and Gelatine's experience with their Fanverse project, and I think prospective Fanverse devs should take note of this. Ultimately, the Fanverse was made for fan games, small projects that couldn't really have been made without utilizing existing assets or concepts. If you start working on a FNAF fan game for fun, the Fanverse is a really amazing way for you to turn what you expected to be a hobby into what could be the start of a successful career, and that's awesome. However, there are a lot of projects that shouldn't target the Fanverse. Just because your game has sit and survive style gameplay, and even if it has creepy furry monsters or robots attacking you, doesn't make it Scott's property. Scott Cawthon doesn't own protect yourself from spooky robots in a restaurant gameplay. MatPat did a whole game theory episode explaining this. In fact, wait, why am I explaining it? I can just have MatPat explain it.
Keep all the characters and locations. Most Freddy fan games take the idea of haunted animatronics hunting you in a building and make it their own by creating new robots in a spin-off story. The mechanics may be the same, but the expression of those mechanics is different. Candies is set in the aftermath of FNAF, alluding to some closed-down pizzeria and featuring the return of a familiar-looking puppet, similar, but not quite the same. The Joy of Creation takes it even further and makes the whole thing free-roaming. Based on these court rulings, Freddy striking down these games would be like Mario striking down Sonic for being a platformer. FNAF created a genre of robot restaurant survival. Is it a very specific genre? Yeah, but if one wanted to make a haunted Chuck E. Cheese style game, you would need a restaurant setting with animal-themed robots. Scott Cawthon wouldn't have a monopoly over that idea. So long as the maps, characters, sound, and story were different, you would be in the clear.
So there you go. If you want to make a FNAF style game, don't use FNAF characters, don't use FNAF stuff at all, and you can just sell it on Steam like any game. You don't have to jump through hoops with the Fanverse and stuff. Games like FNAF Plus obviously can't exist without the Fanverse, and I think those are the kinds of games that work best for it. Games like Pop Goes have been in development for ages now and tied themselves into the FNAF canon. They have to be Fanverse titles. However, you could almost certainly put original creepy robotic characters into a haunted pizzeria and make a FNAF style game and you could sell it. Scott might sue you, but based on MatPat's expert legal opinion, he wouldn't win. Of course, in theory and in practice are two different things. Who wants to be the person to test that? That would potentially require fighting off a very expensive lawsuit from a very wealthy man. So, while Liam from Jelatine is obviously upset, I think they have a really good point, which is that you shouldn't make a FNAF fan game with the expectation that you're gonna get into the Fanverse and get all this funding and build it into this huge game and make a ton of money. That's just not what the Fanverse is about. Build a FNAF fan game because you love FNAF and you want to take a stab at making your own little game for fun. If it's good enough, you can consider submitting it into the Fanverse and maybe making some money off of it and turning it into something bigger. Don't go into it for that though. If that's your goal, you're much better off making an original game with original characters that you can just sell from the get-go. If you're already an established developer with a few games under your belt like the Jelatine team, there are plenty of publishers out there who are way more interested in investing a lot of money and resources into your project. Finally, in regards to the whole merchandise thing, I get it. Merchandise is obviously an incredible revenue stream for the FNAF franchise. It might even surpass the revenue from games at this point, I'm not sure. I can understand that integrating a series like Pop Goes or Candies allows them to make a bunch of merchandise based on these derivative characters and generate a lot of money. That's fine. I presume that also generates money for the developers of those games, which is great. That's all I want. However, the priority of the Fanverse should be uplifting talented fan developers and allowing them to devote more time to and be able to personally benefit from their games. And I'm hoping that will be confirmed as the rest of the Fanverse comes out. I'm hoping that is the emphasis. Thanks for watching. Also, a few weeks ago, I challenged fellow YouTuber Postra to glorious FNAF combat. It did not go so well. Click here to watch.